You always got to challenge your own expectations first, right? And then challenge others. When have I done that lately? And then finally, what risks am I taking? And you only know if you're taking risks if you're failing.
Expanding possibilities, the mindset zone.
I'm your host, Anna Malikian, and before we start with today's show, please remember to visit mindset.zone. Yes, instead of .com, it's .zone. There you can find all the episodes and other amazing resources, all at mindset.zone. Today, my special guest is Frank Wagner. Frank is the founding partner of Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder-Centered Coaching. He received his PhD in the mid-70s, and his specialty is leadership behavior with an emphasis on commitment, teamwork, and influence across organizational boundaries. Welcome to the Mindset Zone, Frank.
Well, thank you, Anna. It is always a pleasure to spend any time with you.
Oh, and it's truly an honor to the interactions and had the privilege of meeting you in person for several years and learning from you and from your amazing personal and professional life stories. And one of the things that we were speaking in the other day that I have to have you in the podcast, because you, for decades, since the late 70s, early 80s, you are working with the leadership, with organization, with training, and you were describing that in the 80s, you were working with Marshall Goldsmith, doing a lot of training in situational leadership in IBM. And you were invited to start a training called the Excellent Manager, correct?
Yes, that's the name IBM gave us to design a program for them.
And from all that work, you wrote your book, The Power of Total Commitment, A Leader's Legacy, that there is now in the second edition of the book, with forewords of Ken Blanchard, the first edition, and Kim Kozos, the second one, correct?
Correct, yes.
So good. Is that just that makes the book to another level. But tell me why about that initial work and why this focus on commitment?
Marshall and I had been well-versed in a number of leadership frameworks. And again, our first professional work was with this program you already mentioned called Situational Leadership. And then when we got involved with this work for IBM Corporation, they wanted us to study excellent managers and to create a training around excellent managers. So we said, great, give us your best managers so we can study them. And it was so interesting that we also included other clients, like at the time, Citibank, Coca-Cola, Dun & Bradstreet. And we put together a training which was very, very well received. And all we did was study excellent managers and captured what they did. Our challenge was they're all different. I mean, they talk differently. They were of different ages. They were both men and women. What is the common ground about these people? And obviously we were focusing on what they did and their behavior. And we were still struggling with how do we organize it? And what we finally came to realize was, the common ground. Well, first of all, I will say one of the things that was very common among all of them is every one of them had extremely high integrity, and they were humble. I mean, they didn't come across like, yes, I'm so great. I'm, a great manager, a great leader. No, that wasn't the way they were at all. What we came to organize all of our learnings from them was around commitments. And it was commitment to what? Whether it was commitment to their customer base, whether it was a commitment to their own organization, whether it was commitment to driving results and achieving success, was a commitment to their people and their teams they worked with. And the one that was interesting, that was our last one we added, was they also had a commitment to themselves. Now, were these perfect people? No, yet they really were long-term successful leaders and managers.
And tell us, because I really like that, because the commitment to the customers, to the organizations, to the people and results, I think, and to values is not unique. Many other people speak about that, but I love at the time the emphasis, because at the time I think the commitment to the self was not the first thing that people thought. So can you tell us a little bit why you felt the need to put that on the model?
Okay, well, see, and it's interesting, between all those commitments I just mentioned, even in this group, if I had to give one of them the lowest score, you can always stack rank any set of things. And now among these excellent managers, even being ranked in last place, commitment to self, they were still better than most at it. Yet if there was a common theme among all these managers that we studied, was when you talk to the people and get their perspective on their leadership and their management, they all loved these people. And one of the terms that came across in a recurring way was, God, they take care of everybody else first. They take care of themselves last. I'm worried about them. I want them to take care of themselves more. So that was actually one of our first, maybe we got to add commitment to yourself there. But remember, it's commitment to yourself as a leader. And so what is it that makes for someone to demonstrate a commitment to self, or any of the commitments? First thing is you got to define what commitment is. I mean, people can have, by the way, there's more than one definition of anything. So I'll just describe to you the way we came up with our definition of commitment. Commitment requires, first of all, it requires belief in something you care about. Like, oh, I'm committed to my family, or I'm committed to my nation, or I'm committed to my profession. And by the way, most people are committed to many things, but you have to believe in it to show commitment. Then the second thing is you've got to act consistent with that belief. That's the integrity part. Let me just pick a profession. Politicians.
Dangers.
They can talk a good game about what they're committed to. But then all of a sudden you look at their behavior and you go, wow, there's a disconnect between what they're saying and what they're actually doing. And see, true commitment requires consistency with what are coming out of your mouth and what you believe in. So that became the basis of any time we look at any commitment area. That's our criteria of saying whether a person has commitment or not.
So commitment in a set of values or beliefs that people have to believe. And these leaders, the excellent managers that you were study, had that commitment, and they were showing through that actions the alignment, the integrity that they had with it, and the area of growth that you identify, that like a little bit the weak spot in the sense that where they could break or get not achieve their potential if they didn't took care of that area of growth, is the commitment to their self-care.
Well, no, but remember, this is just, it doesn't see, when I wrote the book, it was trying to organize this even in a clear, more, I guess, simple way, because no matter what our commitment area was when we first put this framework together, there were sort of different things you did, whether it was a commitment to your customer versus, say, commitment to your employees, yet both were important. I was looking for what's the common ground. Is there a common framework to help understand how do you maintain your commitments? And what I came up with was that there are sort of like two almost opposite things you do for any area that you're committed to. The first thing, if you're committed to something, you support it. You demonstrate a strong positive support for what you're committed to. The second thing, though, and what triggered in my mind when you were using the word growth, is if you're committed to anything, you're committed to make it better.
Cool.
You don't just rest on your laurels. Like, for instance, I'll just take a personal thing. I mean, all of my work has been around organizations, whether it's a business like the IBM Corporation, or it's a nonprofit like the Red Cross or UNICEF. One of the United Nations things is, but let's just take a personal one. See, for a personal commitment, I've been married 53 years. And And you're not going to stay married for 53 years if you're committed to your marriage unless you not only support it, you also have to change with the times and improve upon it. And that's how you maintain commitment. See, all these excellent managers, they maintain their commitments throughout their whole life. It's not like, well, I'll do it for some time, then I'll take my foot off the gas. No, it's all the time. Am I supporting what I'm committed to? And am I improving what I'm committed to?
Can you give us some examples?
First of all, by the way, I got this idea of support and improvement from a famous memo, although it was lost at the time we went to do this work for IBM, by the son of the founder of IBM, Tom Watson Jr. He sent a memo out to every single leader. This is in the day before today where you can do it so simply. They had to actually print out this one-page letter he sent to every leader in IBM, which was 30,000 leaders around the world. It was already a giant company. And they had to put it in the mail and send it to them. The middle of this document had what he considered to be important for leaders. And it was 4 words: challenge up and support down. Challenge up. And we don't have time today to get into that, but I'm just saying that's where my idea came from. I then broadened the concept slightly to say support and improve. And by the way, in any direction, you support in any direction, up or down or laterally, you improve up, down, or laterally. His challenge up was, if you have something to say to help us be a better corporation, challenge management on it.
Yeah.
So let me just deal with then the first order of business. Support. You got to deal with the here and now. Support what you're committed to. 4 things make up supporting what you're committed to. First is focus. And when we say focus on what's important. Where a lot of people are seen as, well, I don't think that person is committed, is they have different definitions of what's important.
Yeah.
So if you don't see someone as committed to what you think is important, focusing on what's important, you don't think they have that commitment to it. So that's the first order of business. And I'll give you an example. I was doing volunteer work for the Canadian Red Cross, and I worked with all the senior team of the Canadian Red Cross and as a volunteer. And it spent a lot of time with them. And then George Weber, who was the Secretary General, which is the top position in the Canadian Red Cross, he gets promoted to run the International Federation. Now, the International Federation is the organizational body that oversees every country's Red Cross function. So that's either like you grew up in Portugal, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, well, see, Portugal would have a Red Cross.
Yep.
But if you were in Indonesia, it would be a Red Crescent Society because you're Muslim. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between, the cross kind of has a Christian bent to it. So he was in charge of 191 countries. Wow. And I was going over in his first years, he was there in the role. And I went to Geneva, where their headquarters are. And I did a training program. At the end of the training program, we went out to dinner, and I was going to fly back to Los Angeles, where I lived at the time, the next morning. So we're out in this little bistro in Geneva. It's getting late in the evening. We're sitting outside at a little table for 2, and the place is deserted outside. There's nobody up in the street. And so I always like to ask leaders, because from my research on leadership and commitment, I said, what's most important to you, George? Now, I'm sitting there thinking, most leaders I've asked the question, they actually give their answer similar to, I would love to be like something like the Red Cross. I mean, what is the Red Cross mission? Help the most vulnerable, right? And so, they're doing good for society. And now George is already the leader of that. Yeah. So I'm anxious to see what he's going to say. And he was reflective to answer the question. He says, well, I can answer that question, Frank, in 2 words. I'm looking forward to this. What are the 2 words? He says, my health. I said, well, focus on what is most important to you. He said, my health. And I said, okay, say more, George. He said, well, the reason for that is that if I'm going to do my job, and we are really trying to prevent and alleviate human suffering, I can't do that if I'm not healthy. So he made a commitment. And by the way, I'd been with George many times before this meeting, and we used to run in the morning before a meeting. I mean, he kept himself in shape on that thing. He took the time because that's what's important. He says, if my health suffers, I won't do my job.
So that was it's like the put oxygen mask first to be able to help others, that they say when we are in the airplane. Before that was the thing that everybody says. We are like the tool, And in many ways has to do, if we think about high performance, at the core is that you have to take care. If we are the tool, if we don't take care of us, who is going to do it?
Right, right. So again, now remember, what is important is different for each commitment area. Yet, see, now here's a guy that actually combined both commitment to self with commitment to his organization and their mission and their customer base, who they were serving. Now, the second thing is, and by this is, remember, part of what's commitment, having beliefs in something, then acting consistent with it. So the second part of commitment is leading by example. So are you leading by example about what's important? Now, I'll use an example. Sometimes I take examples from people I never met. Don't know. This one is a guy I never met. His name is Gandhi. Gandhi, right? Mahatma Gandhi. Now, apparently, he already had this title, so it had to have been later in his life. I heard this story about him. People, just adored him. So there was a long list of people coming to see him, and there's a lineup, and this one lady comes up with her young son, and she says, Mahatma, please do me a favor. Tell my son to stop eating sugar. This was his response to her. He just looked her right in the eye and he said, come back in 2 weeks. Just as I said, come back in 2 weeks. And she kind of go like, what? So she has to leave the line. And then, but you know what? She says, I'm going to do what he said. So she waits 2 weeks with her son. 2 weeks go by. She comes up. She's in line, comes up to him. He looks right at her, smiles, looks at her son and says, stop eating sugar. Now, she's very happy, but she's perplexed. She goes, why couldn't you just said this 2 weeks ago? I could have taken my son home, right? He goes, 2 weeks ago, I ate sugar. So, it's not what your words that matter. It's your actions that matter. So, here's a guy leading by example. I'm not going to tell anyone else to stop eating sugar if I eat sugar, right? So the thing is, how connected is your behavior to what's important? And I see a lot of people that I think are committed leaders, but there's a disconnect between what they're doing connected with what they think is important, what other people think are important. So a good leader makes sure there's a common understanding of what we're doing and why it's important and what's important. So because the first order of being a good leader is your personal example, but then you got to get other people to choose to join you.
Yeah.
Right. So because they show personal commitment and they get much more, the excellent managers got much more commitment out of other people in the same organization that they looked at. So the first two things are focus on what's important, lead by example. The third thing is rewarding success. Now, again, I've been in the field of leadership for my whole career. I can always understand what's going on in any situation by looking at one thing, the reward system. What's getting rewarded, what's not getting rewarded. Right.
Okay, tell more.
So, okay, well, I'll give you a personal example. Ken Blanchard, who wrote the first foreword to my book. See, I probably wouldn't have written this book if it wasn't for Ken Blanchard. He had, at the time I've written this book in the late 1980s. He had already published this groundbreaking book unbelievable book called The 1 Minute Manager. And I wanted to emulate him. And I knew Ken, and he was a mentor to me at that point in time. So he said, Frank, write a page a day. Just keep writing a page a day. You'll get to the finish line. Well, but before, I go back in time, Ken was doing his research for the 1 Minute Manager. And one of his 1 minutes is 1 minute praising in his book. So, but he just one day comes up to me and says, Frank, I'm doing research for a book. Could I ask you a couple of questions? I said, sure, Ken. Ken was such a great guy. He says, okay, I want to ask some questions about rewards. Now, we all fly a lot at the Center for Leadership Studies. I was working in this organization, and he said, you're on a plane and a flight attendant goes out of his or her way to make your flight, enjoyable. Are you likely to recognize that flight attendant? I'm sitting there going, I'm such a frequent flyer in American Airlines. I get these little chits, and I can give a chit to a flight attendant if they're doing a good job. I go through mine all the time. I said, and so my answer to Ken was, would you basically give some recognition? I'd say, absolutely. I immediately said to him, absolutely. He says, and he's got a little clipboard. He write down. He says, that's good. He says, now, Frank, I got a second question for you. We have a great staff that works for us. And someone goes a little bit out of the way to get something proposal out for you and goes out. Are you likely to recognize her? Because they're all women that work in our staff. And I sat there and I was thinking about it. And you know what went through? I can still remember what went through my mind. I said, I actually think I'm better than everybody else in the office. All the other not that they were bad. I'm just saying I think I do it the better. So I said, Yeah, most of the time. Thank you, Frank. Takes his note. Now, he asked me, he says, Frank, I only got one more question. I'm feeling really good. One more question. Now, you have a young son. Like my son is 51 years old right now. He was a little kid. And he said, you always complain about how messy he is. He doesn't pick up his clothes, and all that kind of stuff. His floors covered with stuff, toys and everything. He says, if your son picks up one of his article of clothing or a toy, are you likely to recognize him? And I'm sitting there thinking, you know what I was thinking about? Because I was silent. I was trying to remember if I had ever done it.
Wow.
Now, I never opened my mouth, and Ken says, thank you, Frank. I got my third answer. I'm going, what? I mean, if I ever got mad at Ken Fleischer, this one time. And he said, you are very consistent with my research. Now I'm feeling really, I'm consistent with his research, right? He goes, it's interesting. The person who's a total stranger to you, you are absolutely going to reward them. The person who's, important to us, our staff in our office, you're most likely to do it, but not absolutely doing it. And your son, you're struggling to find one example.
Wow.
I'm sitting there going, guilty, guilty, guilty. He says, this is what's consistent about our research. We have a tendency to reward the people that are more psychologically distant from us than the people that are closest, than the people that are closest to us. So, you know what? I kissed the ground he walked on.
Wow.
I devoted the rest of my life to making sure I was doing as good a job with my family as I was with everybody else. So the first question about rewarding success is, who are you rewarding? Are you ignoring your stars as a leader because they don't need it? They're so successful. Who are you rewarding? And then what are you rewarding them? Because I was working with Wells Fargo Bank. This is now after I actually, was in the process of writing the book, and every person in the bank had gotten a $500 bonus, because they had a great year. They also got one other thing, which is really interesting. And I'd asked later on, do they do this all the time? He said, no, it was an experiment. Everyone got a little piece of a chit, a $35 chit. And they said, and their job was to give it to the person who most helped them have a good year.
Wow.
So now I'm working for this part of this bank, and I go around and I'm talking to people, and I ask them, hey, I hear you got a bonus last year, $500. How was that? Oh, loved it. Fantastic. I said, there's also this chit thing. I said, who did you give your chit to? Now, I didn't ask them if they got a chit, because everybody's not going to get a chit. That'd be embarrassing. So once I find who they gave a chit to, whenever I talk to that person, I'd ask them the same question. The bonus, hey, $500, great. Then I would say, well, did you get a chit? No, I'm asking a question I know the answer to.
Yeah.
And they go, well, yeah, I got it. I said, this is my key question. Which meant more to you? You know what it was? The chit.
The $35 recognition.
Yeah, from a peer. So the thing is, it's both who you're rewarding and how you reward. But see, a good leader is very good at using rewards.
And meaningful rewards. I'm seeing you.
Yeah. Now the last thing, and we actually framed it as the negative, is managing disrespect. See, if you're supporting something, you'll focus on what's important. You'll lead by example. You reward success, and you manage disrespect. Perfect example. People will say I'm a patriot. I'm proud of my country. Well, if you're walking down the street with your kids and you talk about the importance of what a wonderful country we have and what we get from our country, I don't care what country we're talking about, right? And you see someone burning the flag of the nation, right? Showing disrespect to the flag of your nation. What are you going to do? If you walk by, what are you telling your kids? Is he really a patriotic or not? Now, my advice would be go up to that person and say, I see you're burning our flag. I'm assuming you're not proud of this country. Yeah, well, and then say, if you really want to get out of here, I'll buy you a one-way ticket, right? Go to the country that you're really proud of. I'll help you out. Now, that would show I'm patriotic. Now, when Osama bin Laden was apparently at least the money behind, taking Boeing airplanes and turning them into weapons of mass destruction, I could not believe how much flag waving took place in the United States. I wish I would have gotten a flag franchise and I would have made a ton of money. Now they'd cut all air flights. I had to go 1,000 miles to UCLA to teach. I had to drive my car. I wanted to put a flag on it. By this time, I couldn't even get those little, this is right around, I get those little flags that you could put on your waving. So I printed out 3 copies in color from my printer of an American flag, and I taped them on the back windscreen of my car. And when I was driving down, I could not believe I could not drive under an overpass in 1,000 miles without people on their flags, people tooting their horns. I mean, the amazing patriotism. Well, how long did that last? But you know what? On that drive down, I made a little vow to myself. My flags are coming off that car when they catch Osama bin Laden. 10 years. The ink on that stuff got pretty faded 10 years. But you know what? I ceremoniously took that off the day they caught Osama bin Laden.
Wow.
So are you a patriot when it's good times to be a patriot, or are you a patriot when? So, you know, what are you doing to build respect, manage disrespect? If you do those 4 things, you're showing support. Now, we don't got much time left, but I will say, what's the flip side? Improving. You don't just rest on your laurels. So, you know, if you're going to really improve something, what do you do? My favorite car I ever owned was a Porsche. Now, I couldn't buy a Porsche when I was a young man, but I always wanted to. So when I finally got my Porsche in 1980, it was a used one, but it was rebuilt by 3 German mechanics in West Los Angeles. They were good friends at that point in time. Loved my car. So I read about the company, and I realized there was actually named after the founder, a guy named Professor Porsche. And there was a story about the professor, which I loved. This is about looking for a better way. This is a guy that was just about the end of his career, had a very fabulous car company, and he was taking a bunch of dignitaries around their headquarters in Stuttgart. And they had like cars like over there all around their history of their cars. And one guy asked him, Professor, which of all these great lines of Porsches is your personal favorite? His answer, I haven't built it yet. And this guy was just about ready to retire. See, and by the way, 911, which is my car, you know why that's called a 911? The guy had a little book that he would make notes in. And he came up with the idea of the 911 on page 911 of page number 911 in this book. So this guy had gotten through already 900 pages of doodling about what's the future of Porsche. So that shows you a person who's committed. Yeah. And they'd never retire in terms of that. By the way, remember I said the humility side is all the great leaders, the managers that we studied, not one of them said, well, I'm a great manager because of me. They surround themselves with smarter people themselves, learn from others. And Duff Sevier, who's another guy like Gandhi, I never met Duff Sevier, but I saw an article written about him. He builds Western saddles in the United States. He fought in World War II for the Western side, and he grew up in the West. And when he survived and didn't die in battle, he came home and he made a pilgrimage to Pendleton, Oregon. And Pendleton, Oregon was the Hamley saddle shop. They were like the Mecca of Western saddles. He wanted to build Western saddles. He walks into this place, and old Hamley looks at him and he says, I want to work for you, sir. And he's still looks like he was in the Marines. And this is what Hamley said, son, you know, if you're going to come work for me, the apprenticeship is 4 years long. Are you up for it, kid? He said, yes, sir. He stayed 10 years.
Wow.
And he said, and this is what he said, I learned something every day for 10 years, learning from others. Now, by the way, this article is being written because Duff Sevier had taken over as the best saddle maker in the West. And by the way, the Smithsonian, National Geographic, and Ronald Reagan, who was president of the United States, they all said the same thing, best saddle maker. And this guy was an apprentice for 10 years before he started making his own saddles, learning from others.
He's a really great example.
Yeah, so we got to continually doing that, challenging expectations. I'll give you a quick example. Edward de Bono, one of the top leaders in the area of creativity. He put me through the ringer once. He says, okay, you got something you're doing and it works 90% of the time. 10% of it doesn't work. Where do you look for a better way? Remember, looking for a better way is part of our model. But where do you look for a better way? At the 90%, the stuff you're perfectly happy with, or the stuff that's causing you problems? I'm saying to myself, saying, I spend 100% of my time looking for a better way with what I'm dissatisfied with, not what I'm satisfied with. He said, that's pretty common. Why not spend some time looking at what you're perfectly happy with? Well, that's a challenge of expectations. He gave an example of a guy in England, because he's British, who was he did the same thing with him. He was perfectly happy with the way their manufacturing operation worked. By the way, they were in the frozen fish fillet business. He decided to take him up and challenge his own expectations. Let's spend some time looking at what we're perfectly happy with. How we get how we separate the bones and get the fish ready to be freeze fried and freeze frozen and put into packages and sold in supermarkets. Well, I can't remember the story, but let's just say the way they did is they separated the bones from the flesh. They decided, well, what if we separated the flesh from the bones? I'm kind of going, is there a difference? Well, guess what? There was a difference. They changed their whole production based upon this little experiment. And the guy was making almost $1 million more a year.
Wow. Small shift.
Yeah. So the thing is challenging. And the final thing, the hardest of all, risk-making changes. Are you willing to take risks to make changes?
I love it. And I love how you did in the book that you go over this framework with a fable that makes it very enjoyable to read. But now from our conversation that I appreciate so much, I think my challenge is look to this. How can I apply this to myself, to my self-leadership?
Thing is, again, from my good friend Marshall Goldsmith, who, by the way, didn't invent this thing, is one of the best ways is using a daily checklist. You first of all, be clear on yourself of what am I committed to? And you get to choose. No one else has to choose this for you, right? You choose what's important. What are my important commitments? And then you ask yourself, am I focusing on what's important today? How is my personal example? If I want other people are involved with me on this, and who am I rewarding? Am I rewarding people for the right things? And then finally, am I building respect for it? And if anyone showing disrespect for what I'm committed to, will I stand up to them in a positive way? Not a disrespect way, but I'll stand up to them. Then ask yourself, where am I looking for a better way? Who can I learn from? First of all, you always got to challenge your own expectations first, right? And then challenge others. When have I done that lately? And then finally, what risks am I taking? And you only know if you're taking risks if you're failing.
That is the tough one. Yep.
No one can say, oh, I take a lot of risks, but gee, weird. I've succeeded every time I've done it. So what's your tolerance for failure?
Wow. You leave me here speechless. But okay, people, I will make sure that in the show notes, I will put the link for the book. But where do people can learn more about you?
I don't really have all this social media things. So,
but you have a LinkedIn profile.
Well, yeah. Well, I guess if you go to LinkedIn, type Frank Wagner in there, I think you'll eventually find me. And I got a pretty simple email address. It's coach.frank@gmail.com, just lowercase coach.frank@gmail.com. That's where I go by.
And thank you. This is a lot of things to reflect and inspiring. And I really appreciate the time that you give us today.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I love, like I say, I'll end how I began. Anytime I have time to spend with Anna Malikian, it's a good day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Expanding possibilities, the mindset zone.
Thank you for listening. And remember to visit mindset.zone. Yes, instead of .com, it's .zone. There you can find all the episodes and other amazing resources, all at mindset.zone. As always, I'm so grateful you are here. Expand what's possible for you, for the ones around you, for the world.